Hey guys, today we're in the book of Exodus chapter 10. We're continuing in the OK Corral with God, the Hebrew God, Yahweh, and all the gods of Egypt. And so we start today with the eighth plague. And it said, the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh, right? So go into him. And this starts another series of three plagues. So 8, 9, and the 10th plague are going to run together. As the eighth finishes, the ninth will begin. As the ninth finishes, the 10th will begin. Okay, so we have a new series. And he says, for I have hardened his heart. Which means that Pharaoh's not going to change his mind. So what God is doing in these last three plagues are not to change the heart of Pharaoh, because he knows it's not going to happen. They are to prove the power of God to the entire world. And we see this in verse 2. It says that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians and what signs I have done. If you remember in the previous chapters, we've seen that God said the world will know who I am. But now it's not just the world will know. He says your son and your grandson. So it's now just not the world is going to know how powerful Yahweh is, but the generations, time after time, the people, not just around the world, but even the people to come. So the power of God and the knowledge of God will continue to spread throughout time. Okay, so now we can see that these plagues, these miracles of God are not just reaching Egypt, not just reaching the world, but God knows they will reach future generations. So much so that we're reading them here today, thousands of years later. So what happens? Verse 4, it says, for if you refuse to let my people go, I will bring locusts into your country. He's going to bring what we call today grasshoppers, right? Now, this is a act against the Egyptian god named Seth, S-E-T-H, Seth. Seth was the god of chaos. Seth was to be believed. He was the god of the desert. He was waiting outside of the Nile Valley, that if you would leave the green, he was waiting there to devour you. And Seth was the one that held back death and destruction and chaos in the Nile Valley. But if you left the Nile Valley, you're open game to Seth. And so here, what's going to happen? These locusts, these grasshoppers are going to come from the desert and come into the Nile Valley. So this is the God of chaos, the God of storms, okay? And this is who it is. And so basically he says they're going to eat everything that is left. Remember, the hail took out the flax and the barley. What was left? That was the emmer and the wheat, right? Remember we talked about yesterday that they were the lesser crops, but they would have felt like, well, at least we have them to depend on. Well, God's going to say, not so fast. I'm going to take those out today. And Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? In verse 7, we're starting to see the court of Pharaoh is starting to turn against Pharaoh. They're starting to lean towards Moses and say, hey, what's going on here? Like, just let Moses do what he wants. Like, it's starting to hurt our bottom line. It's starting to hurt our money, and the people of Egypt are thinking that we're not gods, right? So that's what they're doing. Verse 10, but he said to them, the Lord be with you. If I ever let you and your little ones go, look, you will have some evil purpose in your mind. Pharaoh comes back and says, sure, I'll let you go, but who's going? And Moses says, everybody's going. And Pharaoh says, no, not, I'll let the men go, but the women and children would stay. And that would be normal, because remember, Moses asked for them to go out into the wilderness to worship. Back then, children and women didn't worship. That was a man's event. The men worshiped. And so he says, well, if you let everybody go, Pharaoh's thinking, hey, you're going to trick me. You're saying you're going to worship, but you're going to take everybody and you're going to leave me. And that's what he says here. I feel like you have an evil purpose on your mind. You only need the men to worship. the Egyptian way of worshiping, but not Yahweh's word of worshiping. So the locusts come and they eat every plant, every fruit. They do everything. Notice in verse 13, it comes with an east wind from the east, from the desert, right? From the Sinai Peninsula, from Iraq and Iran. What's interesting is we will see later on that when the Red Sea parts, it is parted by the east wind, right? This would be the opposite way that the normal wind would blow. And so it brings it in. They eat all the plants, all the fruits. It says, not a green thing remained. And Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron. And once again, he said, he sinned. Forgive my sin. And he asked Moses to plead for him. Plead, intercess for me. Go to God and have him ask for me another chance. And the Lord turned the wind from the east, and he turned it to the west, and he took all of the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in the country of Egypt. Notice this, that the Red Sea becomes death to the locusts. Red Sea becomes death. That'll be important in a few days. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let his people go. Right? So nothing changed. Verse 21, we start the 9th plague, and the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, and darkness to be felt. Now here, the 9th plague is a huge plague. This is going against the god Ra, R-A, Ra, the sun god. Of all the gods in Egypt, Ra is to be the most powerful god. He is the god that brings the sun up over the horizon, goes around, and at night it goes under, but Ra does not quit. He takes the sun for another 12 hours under earth. We call this the afterlife. And then he brings it up the next morning. Ra is constantly moving and controlling the sun on this earth and the next. But what happens? There becomes darkness. Ra, the most powerful god of Egypt, cannot bring the sun back up. Something is more powerful than Ra. This has never been thought of. This has never been seen, but it happens. And notice in verse 22, it says that it was pitch black in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. Just like Jewish custom, it's really a Middle Eastern custom. When something is gone or something is dead for a total of 3 days, that means it is dead and it will never return. That's why in the story of Jesus, Lazarus was dead for 3 days, and they said, it's over. Lazarus isn't coming back. And Jesus said, Lazarus coming out. Jesus was dead for 3 days, and Mary and Martha go to the tomb to finish the embalming process because there was no way Jesus was coming back. But in 3 days, he came back. Our God is greater than 3 days, right? And so here, Ra is defeated. So 3 days of complete darkness, which thinks about chaos, right? Think about no light, chaos. Remember the creation story in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God, the first thing he created was light. Light brings order. Light brings things to see. But here, God takes away order, sets things in chaos where people do not move. People cannot go anywhere. But what's interesting, it says what? That all the people of Israel had light. God just funneled in just around the land of Goshen light. Everywhere else was complete dark. We can fully see the power of Yahweh, this Hebrew God. And Pharaoh called Moses and said, go serve your Lord. Your little ones may go, but let your flocks and your herds remain, right? So remember last time he said, who's going? And Moses said, everybody. And Pharaoh said, no, the women and children need to stay. But now with this plague, this huge plague, Egypt is basically revolting against Pharaoh. Remember, Pharaoh, his name is what? Sa-Ra, the son of Ra. He is the fleshly God. He is God in flesh on earth. And so Ra is dead. So Sa-Ra must not be important. So Egypt is rebelling against Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, fine, 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 Moses, you can go. You can take your women and your children, but you can't take any of your animals. Why would he say that? Because he needs them to come back. He knows that as they go, they're going to get out there and they're going to get hungry. He knows that they're going to need food and they're going to have to come back to Egypt. So it's a way to make sure that the slaves come back to him. But Moses said, but if we go, we're going to need to sacrifice and do burnt offerings. We need animals to do this. Our God wants the same thing that your gods want. He wants sacrifices, and we need animals in order to do this. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, get away from me. Take care never to see my face again, for on the day you will see my face, you shall die. And Moses said, as you say, and I will not see your face again. Pharaoh cuts off salvation. He says, Moses, I never want to see you again. And he says, the day that I see your face, you will die. What's interesting is the next time that Moses and Pharaoh see each other face to face is where? It's in the bottom of the Red Sea. Somebody's dying, but it will not be Moses. So you would ask yourself, where is Jesus in this? We can see that God is the God who is greater than 3 days. God is the God over any other God. Jesus, when he said, before Abraham, I am, he is the God that is greater than the 3 days of death. And we see that, especially being this close to Easter, that after 3 days, Jesus resurrected himself, not contained to a grave, but resurrected and walked on the earth for 40 days, Easter 40, and then after that ascended to the right hand of the Father to intercede for us, just as Moses is interceding for Pharaoh, between God, the holy, and Pharaoh, the unholy. Hope that makes sense. We'll see you tomorrow in chapter 11. God bless.